From a very young age, William Blake was trained to be an artist. As a child, he was apprenticed to a professional engraver. He worked further for another engraver as he reached his teens, and actually, as he got older, spent some time in England's premier art school, the Royal Academy. The idea was that William Blake would make a living doing engravings for books. He would illustrate books. Well, as William Blake developed into a poet, developed into a writer in his own right, he wanted to come up with a way to illustrate his own poetry, a way he could do so quickly and efficiently, self publishing, as it were. He was one of the first poets to publish his own work in his own house and distribute it himself. He was not very successful in doing so. Blake's most beloved sibling, his name was Robert. He died of tuberculosis when Blake was still fairly young. Blake nursed his brother for 3 straight days without sleeping or eating, as the story goes. He said that when his brother died, he saw his soul go clapping up into heaven. This was a major moment in Blake's spiritual life. After his brother died, Blake said that the spirit of his brother would visit him, and he said that his brother Robert's spirit taught him this method of printing. So it's important to note Blake's method of printing, not only for understanding how he actually made his words and images in his so-called illuminated works, but also we can see his printing techniques metaphorically. So Blake practiced a form of engraving called relief etching. And here's what he would do. He would get a plate of copper and he would paint the image straight onto the plate of copper with a mixture that contained oil. He would paint the image, but also he would write the words. Now, he had to write the words backwards from right to left, so they would appear left to right on the page. So, of course, he drew his images backwards as well. Then he would pour acid onto the plate, and the parts of the plate that were not covered with the oily mixture were eaten away. They were corroded. So now Blake had a plate with raised parts, and these raised parts would make the words and images that he wanted. He would then ink the copper plate, and he would press it onto paper, and when he had the words he wanted, when he had the outline he wanted, he would then paint in watercolors to fill out the empty spaces. So each particular illuminated book that Blake made was a particular object. No two are the same. This is one interesting context for thinking about Blake's interest in particularity. The idea that each of his books was unique itself alone. Now, how is his printing technique metaphorical? Well, first of all, as we will see when we read The Mayors of Heaven and Hell, Blake says, without contraries, there is no progression. He was very much a poet and a painter who valued contraries, the interaction between oppositions, how antinomies mutually include each other as opposed to mutually exclude each other. In reading a page of Blake, we know now that there is a contrariness in it, that he wrote one way and printed another way. So this is just an interesting metaphorical way of thinking about the content of his painting and of his words, which again tend to not only explore oppositions, but as we will see, Blake often uses irony, a rhetorical form, a rhetorical figure, in such a way that he will posit an idea but question that idea at the very same time, leaving readers in a place of productive ambiguity. Moreover, Blake's illuminated works, again works that have both words and images, are contrary in another way. His images do not simply exemplify his words. If you read an illustrated book, even today, you'll note that most of the illustrations simply picture the words. Well, Blake's images often questions his words, or sometimes indeed undercut his words. So the words and images in Blake are in a dynamic and again often ironic relationship with one another, which makes for a very ambiguous reading experience, but a potently ambiguous reading experience. All these ideas together and these practices together make what Blake calls in The Mayors of Heaven and Hell the infernal method of printing, where one uses corrosives to burn away unnecessary surfaces to reveal what was hid. And what is hidden? The infinite. And this connects to another line in The Mayors of Heaven and Hell: when the doors of perception are cleansed, the world will appear as it is, infinite. So as you're reading Blake, keep that printing method in mind. Keep the metaphorical possibilities of that printing method in mind as you explore his own explorations of the relationship between opposites, but more richly as you study the dynamic relationship between word and image.